takes about a month per 1,000 square feet to lease these kinds of properties. So if you have a 1,000 square foot unit, it takes a month to lease. Whereas if you have a 10,000 square foot unit, which we do have some, it can take close to a year to lease. And so that's one of the great things about this is you have a tenant that leaves, you're not underwater on your mortgage, and before you know it, you have another one.
Here's the one. I have a dream. With great power comes great responsibility. I could do this all day.
Zip, don't get scared now.
They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom. Cinderella's story out of nowhere. It's in the hole. That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Whoa! Welcome back to Capital Hacking, John. Are you tomahawking?
Welcome back to Capital Hacking.
All right. Well, see, that tomahawk was more powerful than my tomahawk today. So thank you very much. For those of you enjoying the YouTube episode, you'll see that John did not spare any expense with that. Welcome to the show. So thank you, buddy. Hey, wasn't it fun to meet Kim today? I told you she'd be great.
She was, and I had never met Kimberly Hawkins before, and she was absolutely fantastic. And it was so interesting because I think she's the first one. I don't know if she's the first one on the show, Josh, because you've been doing this for years, but she's been on the first one on the show since I've been on that has a PhD in mathematics, and her husband has a PhD as a microbiologist. We're talking about academia at its finest.
Yeah.
Moving into entrepreneurship, Josh.
Yeah, and not even just entrepreneurship, a really compelling asset class. So for those of us who are listening today, many of us get to hear a lot about wonderful multifamily investing and other kinds of real estate assets, but she goes through her criteria why she chose not to invest in multifamily. I think a lot of people are going to want to hear that. They're also going to want to hear what she ended up choosing, which, spoiler alert, it is multi-tenant industrial. You don't even hear that often on these types of shows. So she's going to do a deep dive. We pushed this young lady to tell us about her first project she ever did, how she found it, why she chose it, what happened financially, and what it all cost. So I think we learned a lot. It's like you could actually go do this after you listen to this one episode.
Yeah, and it was fascinating for her to talk about the W-2 golden handcuffs, as we often refer to high-paying W-2s, to making the transition on being a full-time businesswoman and her husband being a full-time businessman.
Yep, exactly. So you're going to take away from here a deep dive into a new asset class. You'll understand some of the pros and cons. We get into what the difference in the lending world. For those of us that have only ever done homes, and we've done them very well, as John has the biggest portfolio of all my buddies. He has a lot of homes, and other people do multifamilies. We have heard those gentlemen and ladies talk about loans and how to get a lending partner. But this is new. She's going to tell you how different it is in her world, her business, and she's going to give you a little insight there. So lots to take away from her example there. And she's going to yell the word freedom. I mean, in our intro song, we were able to contract Mel Gibson to repeat his song where he screams out, well, William Wallace, freedom. That's like her mantra too. And she says it. And by the way, didn't she have camaraderie with you, John, that she's in fight clubs and this is a tough lady.
Yeah, she's in good shape. Definitely fitness is a strong part of their family culture. And you guys are in store for a great episode.
John, we've done it. We've got Kim Hopkins on the big show. Welcome to the big show, Kim.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Great to have you, Kim. Can you run us through Iron Peak Properties, your background, what got you into it?
Sure. A lot of left turns got me into it. I tell you, leaning my ladder against the wrong building. I became an expert at that. So I actually, didn't know what I wanted to do. I was good at math. I was good at numbers, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was good at negotiating. So I actually ended up getting a PhD in math. I know there's nothing less exciting at a cocktail party than to announce that you study algorithmic number theory. Don't worry, I won't tell you about it because I don't remember a thing about it. But got a PhD in math, promptly realized after moving out to Los Angeles to be a National Science Foundation fellow at UCLA that I hated it. Hated academia, hated the ivory tower, wanted to work on something real. So I went on a job search, got a job doing tax credits, something even less sexy than math, going in the right direction here, and worked my way up in that field and ended up in sales, consultative sales. And I was enjoying it, but I really had golden handcuffs. So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, right? I think we've all been there. right? So 2013, I read the little purple book that we all know, the Rich Dad Poor Dad. Said my husband, you got to read this. And we made a 5-year plan. And the 5-year plan alternated buying properties and having babies. So I think it went property, baby, property, baby, property, property. Unlike you, sir, we have not that many babies, just 2, but quite a few properties now. So that's how I got into real estate.
So you have more babies than properties. And so there you go.
No, other way around.
I meant more properties than babies. You're right. And I have more babies than properties. So
that was my next question, Josh.
That's a killer overview, but you also, and we're going to get into it, such a great deep dive into the work you do today. It's called the categorization of your industry. What do you call it again? What type of real estate do you love?
2 things, multi-tenant industrial and neighborhood retail.
Love those 2 sectors. We haven't done enough of that on this show to explain how that works. So buckle up, folks. We're going to learn the math, the deal dives. We're going to understand it. But John, I appreciate you asking for that backstory for Kim, because my backstory with Kim was brief, but great. She and I met through friends. And our friends are the real estate guys. Kim and I were just talking about that, right? I mean, I think I ran into you in Arizona talking to Russell Gray, and you were there with me. And you have a positive energy, and you're clearly in a subset of real estate I'm curious to learn about. So I thought, what better than to get you on the big show? So thank you for taking us up on that.
And thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I really appreciate the time and looking forward to chatting with you.
Kim, what got you to read the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
You know, what's funny is, do you remember Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew, Loveline?
Of course, yes.
Okay, good. I'm not that old. So I was listening to Adam Carolla podcast. He still has a podcast. And he actually had Robert Kiyosaki on. And I was like, who is this guy? So went and read his book and then read a bunch in his series as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I was curious. It was actually, you were not out there seeking to change your understanding of finance. So it wasn't about finance at first. It was about his curious points he made on that podcast.
Yeah, you know, I always say fashion ain't my passion. I always knew I wanted to build something, but I didn't have any talent in, you know, products or widgets and these cupcake companies. Remember the Sprinkles cupcakes?
Yep.
You know, all those businesses were popping up and I just didn't have that physical product skill set. So I knew I wanted to build something, but from my background, my strengths are numbers, reason, rational thought, negotiation, logic. What do you do with that? You know? And so I didn't know what was out there until I read the Purple Book. And I was like, well, that's what I really want is I want to build a business, but at the same time, I want financial freedom, you know? And after I got financial freedom, then I realized I want even more freedom. I want freedom of time. I want freedom to work on what I want, and I want to work with the people I want to work with.
I love it. Hey, so I hear you went from having a PhD in math, which is a great, you know, conversation starter, like you said, to going into tax credits and then into sales. And there was golden handcuffs involved there. Then you hear Robert Kiyosaki on the Adam Carolla show. Now, what about you? Isn't your husband is your business partner, right? So how did you wrangle him? Now, I know you said you got to read this book. But where was he? What was he up to before you guys started this?
Yeah, so he was a PhD in microbiology.
You guys had great dinner conversations.
Great dinner conversation. We used to go to the Macaroni Grill and like explain our research to each other when we were poor grad students, by the way. But that's for another time. Yeah, so he was in microbiology and he also left academia. He worked for one of the biggest blood testing companies out there and he was a research scientist. And it wasn't too hard to convince him because he hated his job. You know, we were living in Los Angeles, driving an hour each way, and not to focus too much on the details, but that's kind of something I really preach is that the details are what matters. You know, like when you get up in the morning, what your commute's like, what are you doing all day? Who are you spending your time with? That's what really matters at the end of the day. All we have is the present. So he hated his present situation. So he didn't require much convincing. In fact, we had a 5-year plan, like I mentioned, but he actually quit a couple years early because he couldn't stand it anymore. And what we did was we figured out that if we could increase my sales commissions to replace his salary, then he could quit his job. So hopefully the old corporation isn't listening to this, but we added him secretly to my email account and we had him take care of all my follow-ups for sales. And that way I became the top salesperson so we could replace his salary with my increased commissions.
Whoa. I love that. That's a very 4-hour work week, but like on its head. So that, by the way, that's incredible. We should all be doing that, John. Let's get a sales gig, have one of our relatives do the work, and we'll take all the credit. I like it. No, you obviously were great at it as well. But John, may I ask a quick question here?
Yeah, man, go for it.
All right. So since John went down this rabbit hole of the purple book, which is called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and we don't actually talk about it enough other than Robert Kiyosaki's our intro. And he reminds listeners every day, this is the most important thing you can listen to today.
Absolutely. That's what I think every time I listen to us.
Yeah, when he says that, it makes me pump up. So, and I always say it's hard to get him on the radio every day, but we call him in every single day. He says the same thing. It's unbelievable. So here's my question to you, though. You've kind of already answered it in the most creative way about the products. You weren't interested in creating products, and you weren't about sprinkles, and fashion ain't your passion. I love all that. But what about the book? Because you're an academic, you're a PhD. That book is written for all of us. As a matter of fact, it's written in a very easy story format. If you haven't read it, folks, the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki. Very curious book. If you haven't read it, you might love it. What about it caught your attention, though, Kim? You're an academic. You're a smart lady. That book's simple. But why was it revolutionary to an academic, smart person like you?
Well, it's interesting because I believe that life is all about concepts and pattern recognition and solving problems. And solving problems and all of that is about how can I take this lesson over here and apply it over there? It's all about the big picture, So yes, it is a very simple book, but it's the principle that matters. And it was the eye-opening principle that what I wanted was actually freedom. I wanted freedom to build a business where I was the boss and I set the hours and I set the terms. And even though the book was simple, that concept just lit the fire.
Yep. Okay. See, that's actually, you're answering every question differently than I thought you were going to answer it. I'll be honest with you, because freedom is the compelling why that you took away from the book. Absolutely. But the book, some people throw it on their head. They're like, oh, that's how this works. Actually, a lot of the capital hacking philosophy comes from that book and the idea that it's actually right in front of us. The code to crack this code is right in front of us. We walk right by it all the time, whether it be a house, putting debt on a house and benefiting from forced depreciation if you do anything to the house. All those kinds of simple principles, they're in front of us all the time. Anyway, but I love where you went with that. And then you applied your reason, your negotiation, and your strategy and your math. And thank you very much for being here, because that is compelling. Now, you're different than some other guests because you're not in multifamily. So the next part of the show here is a mathematician's selection of real estate asset classes. So John, I know a little bit about Kim. She's going to explain to us why she chose what she chose. And this is actually a great education for all of us.
Thanks for asking, Josh, because that was my next question. Most people just buy a single family home at first. They got, like you said, the golden handcuffs, which a lot of people, in GoBundance, we even have a leaving your W-2 micro tribe, because a lot of guys are golden handcuffed and trying to do that. So yeah, I'd love to hear how you got directly into industrial space.
Yeah, absolutely. So the great thing about golden handcuffs is they're made from gold. In other words, the nice thing is if you have a corporate job, you hopefully have been living below your means and you have some money saved aside. And that is what, fortunately for us, we had been grad students before. So we were just pros at living below our means, like pizza boxes everywhere, just simple folk.
Was there ramen noodles in that?
Well, now I'm keto, so the pizza and the ramen noodles have kind of gone to the wayside. But yeah, essentially. So we did have some capital built up. And because of that, we didn't really want to start with a single family home. We also didn't want to start with single family homes because of the economies of scale. We wanted something where, you could go a little bit bigger and the systems were easier to deploy. If you have one house over here, it's more difficult than just having one property with multiple units. So that's step one. We knew we wanted multi-tenant. Step two was, what are your skill sets? What are your strengths? And we didn't want to really have residential tenants. We didn't want to be fixing toilets in the middle of the night. Our passion from this long quest we went on to build our own business was to help other business owners. We wanted to be involved in business owners and small business. I mean, we just are very passionate about that. So we wanted business owners as tenants. And there's a lot of other advantages of that too. If someone doesn't pay rent, you can, with good conscience mostly, lock them out. You're not locking someone out of their home, So we knew we wanted business tenants. And then for office, that required too much TI, which stands for tenant improvements. That was every time you get a new office tenant, they want the walls rearranged, they want the new floor, the drop ceilings, the creative office space. Now they want individual offices. It's very expensive and time consuming. So that opportunity cost is a lot, And then at the time, we didn't really want retail either for similar reasons. So that left us with industrial, and we knew we wanted multiple tenants. So that's multi-tenant industrial. And that product type, just for people who don't know, it's actually everywhere. You just might not have seen it. It's a big warehouse that's just like multifamily. Everyone has their own unit. It's anywhere from like 1,500 to 2,000 square foot units. Picture that in like a 30,000 square foot building. And everyone has mostly warehouse, an overhead roll-up door, just like your garage, overhead roll-up door, small office, small bathroom, very versatile. You have all sorts of tenants, general contractors, painters, audio repair, boat repair, CrossFit gyms, cleaning companies, very versatile.
She's stuck in that CrossFit. You can see by the arm she's doing her workouts. That's for sure.
It's a cult. You should join.
Josh, you go first, maybe.
Well, I want to compliment you. You're a very good educator as well. So this is helping me understand. I feel like we're walking right into a masterclass here where we're going to learn how to do this. And within 13 minutes, 3 of us are going to buy a multi-tenant. No, just kidding. Let's dig into that concept. First of all, great process of elimination. You wanted multi-tenants to de-risk it. You wanted it not to be residential because of the complications and the sophistications and the lack of the ability to foreclose efficiently, because there would obviously be complications to foreclose, including your emotions connected to that. Industrial, you said you wanted to also help small business. That's an interesting blend. So, okay, now you say that, you write that on a paper. Talk to me about you and your husband deciding and a business plan. All right, so you've dissected it correctly in your own opinion. You're correct. How do you go from there to buying the first one?
We read a bit more. We read a book. I think we can link to it if you want. Craig Coppola. It was a book on industrial by the Rich Dad Poor Dad group. So we read Kenny's books, Ken McElroy. So we read a bit more, but I do want to say about that there really is such a thing as analysis paralysis. And I think whenever we read books like that, we're always asking, can I do it yet? Can I do it yet? Now can we do it? Now can we do it? So that's what we had in mind. Always, let's get started. Let's take some action. And then we started looking. We were living in Los Angeles at the time. We started looking around LA for about 5 minutes. And then I developed the investing motto ABC, anything but California. None of those deals made sense. So then we looked back in my hometown, Portland, Oregon, and those deals didn't make sense. So then we ended up looking just across the river from Portland in Vancouver, Washington. And that was a great market because Portland doesn't have any sales tax. Vancouver doesn't have any income tax. So people live there and then they come down to work in Portland. And so we love those kinds of markets that are not quite on the radar, but clearly growing, lots of rooftops nearby. So yeah, that's how we started. And we got a connection to a broker in that market and found our first property.
Can you walk us through that first property that you bought? Did you use other people's money? Did you have your own money? The whole picture. I'm interested in hearing how you started with that first.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a combination. We had a family member who invested a third, and this was before we knew anything about syndication. So they invest a third, they get a third back, period. No fees, no nothing, just third, pro rata. And then we did the rest. And this first property, we drove the broker, both the seller broker and our own, actually, absolutely insane because we're both super analytical and asked, emails and emails, pages and pages of questions. But it was 2013 and, we were just still kind of coming out of the recession. So we were very lucky that the property, I think, was only 75% occupied at the time. And so we were very nervous about that. But we were encouraged by the property manager. And this is another thing, tangent to my tangent. The property manager was an older gentleman and he thought of the property as his own. He had been managing it for years and years and years. He thought of it as his property. And he didn't want us to mess it up, And at the time, only for a split second, our egos were temporarily hurt, like, he doesn't want us telling him how to do this, In retrospect, I realized that was exactly what you want in a property manager. You want a property manager who thinks of the property as his own and just wants you to let him do his work or her work, So it was 75% leased when we got into contract. And by the time we closed, it was close to 100% leased. So we were very lucky in that regard.
What was the square footage on that? How many tenants did you have?
It's about 35,000 square feet, and the tenants are about 1,000 to 1,500 square feet. And again, luck that we ended up in that particular type of structure, because multi-tenant can mean a lot, right? It can mean a 20,000 square foot building broken up into 2 tenants. And at the time, I remember we were very nervous about all the tenants. It was like 30 tenants or something. I don't know if I've done my math right, but it's like 20 or 30 tenants. And we thought, oh my gosh, this is so many tenants. This is going to be so difficult. But the algorithm we've kind of observed in retrospect is that those smaller sizes lease so much faster. In fact, my algorithm for that is that it takes about a month per 1,000 square feet to lease these kinds of properties. So if you have 1,000 square foot unit, it takes a month to lease. Whereas if you have a 10,000 square foot unit, which we do have some, it can take close to a year to lease. What? And so that's one of the great things about this is you have a tenant that leaves, it doesn't hurt you're not underwater on your mortgage. And before you know it, you have another one.
I'm going to write that down because there was a show we did with Matt Faircloth, a great friend of ours, and he taught our audience the 1% rule for apartments or houses. You say if the lease of that room is $1,000 a month, you'd be willing to pay about a 1 or 100%. 1%, that would be a 1% factor of $100,000 purchase of that unit. Yeah. But you just taught us a cool rule of thumb that you've learned from just doing it. Or was it in books that if it's 1,000 square feet, it might only take a month to lease and you factor it up like that?
No, that was purely my observation.
Makes a lot of sense though, because you're saying that the small mom and pop style business, it moves quick. It changes its minds and rent space quick, and they need small bits of real estate to rent.
Yep. And by the way, I listened to that podcast with Matt Faircloth. That's incredible. He's an incredible human.
He is a good dude. I have so many cool questions. I want to keep deep diving into this one. So, I think we understand how you got the place, but you said something quickly that you had already leased it up to full. So I have 2 questions about buying something that had 75% occupancy. One, did you get a discount for that? And did you factor that in? Give us the math and how you factored that into the price. And what was the price, if you can share?
It was a hair under $3 million. Uh-huh. And we did factor that into the price. So back in the day, we just underwrote it on the existing numbers. And I think that's part of what completely drove all the brokers insane, right? Is we were like, well, it's 75% occupied. So here's your actual income, here's what your existing income is. Here's your expenses. The difference, as we all know, is your net operating income. Here's the cap rate he told us to use. Here's the purchase price, period. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we underwrote the vacancy, and I think there was some negotiation, but we ended up getting it, based on the existing value. And then we went and talked to this property manager and told him basically, we need you to lease this up. Can you do it? And he said, absolutely, I can do it. And we trusted him.
So what was the cap rate back then that they told you to use for your analysis?
You're testing my memory. I would say it was probably 7.3% about that. The funny thing is, as the market has changed, and as we all know, it's been really hard to buy deals lately, but by some stroke of luck or something, we've actually stayed pretty consistent with that entrance cap rate.
Okay. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? So you were able to, very interesting. So what that means, folks, and I'll do a stab at it, but I want you to take a stab at it, Kim. It means that if you were, one factor would be to take the income, the profitability that it's making, let's say it's $100,000, you would then take that $100,000 and divide it by 7.3%. And that would be about, for every $100,000 you would be willing to pay, is that about right? About $1.3 million?
I hope so. I'm not that good at math.
Come on, you're not that good at math. You're hilarious. So therefore, the EBITDA or the net profit on these, 47.3. Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes to. For every $100,000 at that cap rate, typically you'd be willing to spend over $1.3 million for the purchase. So does that kind of come true? Was it making just over a few $100,000, like less than $300,000?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay. And so that surprises us sometimes as an outsider. We think of buying a $3 million building and it's throwing off a lot of money, but ultimately it's going to throw off about 7% is what you're saying. 7% is what these models usually work on.
Yeah. And the beauty of buy and hold too is the cash on cash for that property probably started close to the cap rate. And now we're at 14, 15%. So it just keeps getting better.
Man, you guys are getting me today. That was my next question, the cash on cash. And all right. So yeah, when you hold that cash on cash keeps going up and up and up.
And debt. This is my next couple simple questions, complicated questions, actually. So the brokers, that first one is not how you buy them now, I imagine. You have a different type of relationship with brokers. But lending, let's talk about the normal multi-tenant, small business style industrial like you described. That sounds like a slightly complicated thing to get lending on, I would think, because this is just us coming from the outside. In commercial real estate, I thought it was all about the quote unquote, the collateral. I'm sorry, the credit worthiness of the tenant. So the more credit worthy the tenant, meaning a famous brand or someone with a personal guarantee, that would then help the bankers feel good about giving you the debt. But in a situation like this, you're talking about florists or CrossFit gyms that are, a couple guys that have a business idea and they probably don't have great credibility and credit. How does a bank look at that you're really helping small businesses, but that to them is usually not a good thing? So how does that all come together for a lender?
Hey, my florist and CrossFit gym are both doing great right now.
I bet they are.
But yes, back to the point. So yes, you're totally spot on. I mean, I'm a little surprised the bankers don't understand this prototype more because I tried to pitch it to the bigger banks as, look, it's multifamily, right? We have our leases, by the way, are often as short as 1 year. So it's like, all right, it's multifamily, same length lease, but now you have business tenants. Isn't that great? And they oftentimes don't get it for exactly the reason you said. They're looking at those long-term big credit tenants, which ironically in the last few years have not done very well.
Ironically, right.
And by the way, if you try to collect rent from a Kmart, it's like trying to collect rent from the government. Good luck, Whereas if you're trying to collect rent from a mom and pop, you're talking to mom and pop, So we had trouble with the traditional lending. And so where we started was with credit unions. We started with local credit unions and they wanted to do business. They understood it. So we started with local credit unions. And then once we got a little more established, we actually have moved to life insurance companies for lending. Have you had experience with that?
Well, this is so complicated. And for those of us listening, this truly is a masterclass, John. We've slipped into a masterclass. Well, when you say life insurance, I remember years ago doing resorts at the $50 million level and things like that. And they're like, well, eventually when you have a few larger resorts and you'll want to go to the life insurances because they want to displace a 50 to 150 million at a time. So I always thought of that as like, we'll get there someday with scale because life insurance groups do need to place money in debt. But you would think they need large deployments. So you're confusing me. How did you get access to life insurance and how much money are we talking about in those distributions?
Yes, I am nowhere near the size that you just described. Yes, so we got an introduction again through a relationship. Actually, the broker that we annoyed in the first deal came through and gave us an introduction to a life insurance broker. And yeah, he has, there is a minimum. I think you have to take out at least a couple million. But yeah, they have a few different life insurance companies they work with. And the great thing about life insurance for a buy and hold investor is, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with this, but in non-residential commercial, the term on the loan is usually only 5 to 7 years. I mean, if you get 7 years, the bank is really proud of themselves. I got you 7 years,
That's right.
With the life insurance, you can get a 10 to 15 year term. So that's 10 to 15 years fixed rate term. And so that was incredible. Now, the downside of that, if you are syndicating or something like that, is the way they get you is there's a really big prepayment penalty.
That's right.
Right. So you can't be planning to sell it early. But the rates have been incredible. We've built these relationships and we get the long-term money. So
yep, I'm loving this, John. Go for it.
Yeah, me too. But I'm learning. I actually had no idea you could use a life insurance company to help purchase a building. So that's definitely new to me. You had mentioned about like you didn't want, in the beginning, you were mentioning like you didn't want individual tenants because of, issues around. But so how are you vetting these small businesses? I mean, the other question was the length of lease. You said you're as short as a year, which I've owned a business and actually was a fight gym and we were in a 10-year lease. So what is the average length of the lease? How do you vet this tenants? Because tenants can come to you with any idea like, hey, I want to start whatever, a cabinet making company. And how do you give that a stamp of approval? What's the vetting process?
Yeah, so we should talk about fight gyms later, but I'll stay focused. Interested. So that's the nice thing about these smaller tenants is, yes, we vet them, but if they do go out of business, they're quick to relet and there's no TI, right? So you just lock the doors, move on, next tenant. But we do vet them. We do ask for financials. Typically, the avatar, overused word, for these kinds of tenants are businesses that are already established that have just gotten too big for their garage. So they're contractors, they're working out of their house, or they're, I guess the CrossFit gym is probably not starting out of their garage, but mostly they're too big for their garage. So they have been established. The other thing we like to do are personal guarantees. So we always try to get a personal guarantee. And just for the listeners, that's basically where the individual, not the company, is guaranteeing this lease. So you can to go after their assets if they do not pay the lease. Now, do you ever actually go out after their assets? Gosh, I hope none of them are listening. No. You never do it. It's too much work. You're not going to go to court for 1,000 square foot tenant, right? But do I have a template email on file telling them that if they don't pay rent, I'm going to personally go out? Yes, I do. I have that email, if people are not paying rent. So you vet them, you see some financials, maybe some tax returns, you get that personal guarantee, and they're starting in the space the next week.
Huh. And then when you were saying about like evictions, you don't have to go through the process. You can literally go and change the locks if they don't pay their rent on time or they're delinquent.
It depends on the state, but we try to invest in friendly states. So you can do that in Texas, for example, and things like that. I mean, you obviously have to follow the process of a tenant default, but usually the default language is that you have to give them a period to cure. So, you have 10 days to pay this rent. Okay, we're really serious now. You really have only 10 days to pay this rent. Okay, seriously, this is the last 10 days. All right, now we're locking you out. We told you 100 times. So it's, something like that.
Got it. And how many of these industrial spaces have you guys purchased now?
We've purchased about 16 and we've sold one.
Wow.
Now, there's a couple other topics we should get into before we let you run, because we've learned a lot here. I could see a follow-up based on people's comments in the reviews eventually here. So that's right, Kim. Everybody's writing a review right now, and they're commenting on how smart Kim Hopkins is. Oh, my gosh. Everybody, thank you for all those reviews that are coming in right now,
Did you see that, Josh? It's crazy.
I know, they're coming in right now. and yeah, I'm talking to you, Jenny. So let's switch gears to two really interesting things that you said that you've learned from this business earlier when we were talking. One was freedom is very important to you, and that seeking other people's invested capital and through syndication is not always going to be your first choice. And so many people that are on the show, including the show we talked about, Matt Fairclough, his whole business is letting other people participate and him raising capital. You have a different perspective on that. Would you mind sharing your perspective on that?
Yes. So like Matt, my purpose is to create freedom for everyone that I encounter, So when we do syndicate, that is where we're coming from. We want to create freedom for everyone in our lives and everyone that's part of our network. At the same time, I also want to maintain that freedom for myself. I've worked very hard to quit that corporate job, as I'm sure we all have. And it's very important to me that I work when I want, on what I want, with the people I love, and I don't want to create another job for myself. So I do encourage people. I know a lot of people syndicate now, and sometimes you almost have FOMO, right? Sometimes you're like, well, everyone else is doing it. I should be doing it. I only have 150 doors, not 1,000, 500 doors. And so there's definitely not a right answer. We did syndicate our last deal that we bought just in December, and it was a great experience. But I do encourage people to sort of start with that top-down approach of what do you want your life to look like? What is your day-to-day, And if you can put systems in place, which all of you guys have and Matt has and all the successful syndicators, if you could put systems in place so that you can still maintain that lifestyle design, great. Go for it. But I'm just very cautious as I go to maintain that lifestyle design that I've worked so hard for.
Now, all right. So and Josh is, and you are as well, but we're big family people, right? And Josh's business partner is his wife. My business partner is my wife. And we've always had our kids involved in all the different stuff that we're involved in. And even in our investments with other syndications that we've invested in, our kids have jumped in, and we've written up little legal agreements with them and all. So how are you involving or are you involving your kids, and how are you doing that if you are?
I love that, by the way. So my kids are 4 and 6. Funny enough, I did try to involve them.
I didn't realize you were that young, by the way.
We took them to the properties. We have some great pictures. I'll have to send them to you of the kids in front of these industrial properties. And, we've had grand visions of, bringing them to the property and showing them the family business. And like 5 seconds after getting there, they're like, I'm bored. I have to pee, So I know that's not exactly the answer you were looking for, but I'm completely in line with what you said. Our goal is to involve them into the family business, to show them that path of entrepreneurship. I don't know if your family, your parents were entrepreneurs, but mine were not. They were actually academics, apple tree. And
apple tree. You have a lot of witty one-liners that drop underneath your breath. I love it.
I just made that up. And so I really want to expose them early to the idea of entrepreneurship. So right now it's mostly lemonade stands, and my kids actually this weekend want to sell their paper airplanes. So we'll see how that goes.
See how that goes.
Right.
Hey, quick story.
That is our goal.
Quick story. We don't have to talk about lemonade stands, but my kids did one time. They got into it. Like, they were doing them all the time, John. And they were doing cupcakes, and these cupcakes were really nice, and they were selling them for a lot of money. That got exhausting. So then they went to lemonade. Then the lemonade that we didn't have anymore. And I came home from work, and they're like, I see a stand out there. I'm like, I thought we ran out of lemonade. They're like, yeah, we were selling water. But they were in the lemonade thing. And when you push the button, water came out, and they sold it for as much as they were selling the lemonade the day before. And because people are so supportive of young people doing anything off their phones, right? Like, that's the whole point of life now. So if you see a kid walking, you're like, hey, congrats. People were paying them for the water, John. It blows my mind. And I told them, no more water sales, because we live in this neighborhood, folks.
That's amazing.
Oh my God.
I got to say though, Josh, man, and I'm notorious for it. Like, if I'm driving in my neighborhood or in any neighborhood and I see kids like selling whatever the heck they're selling, like, I will stop my car.
I know you will. Me too.
Around, buy whatever I can from them, because like you said, they're getting out and they're actually getting a hustle. And I got to share a win, and it's pretty cool. But the other day we were talking to our youngest, he's 14, and he's like, he does really well in school. And we were just talking about different colleges, because Sylvie just went on a college visit. And he's like, yeah, I'm not going to college. There's no way. He's like, I'm going to run a business. I'm going to do what you guys are doing. I'm going to take over your real estate empire. Like, I have no interest in college. And I thought, wow, we did something right to have our kid know that college is just an option. It's not this necessary thing that they have to do.
Yeah.
Totally agree. At my corporate gig, they were always asking me when I first had my kids why I didn't have a 529 plan, And I was like, they're not going to college. And they're like, what do you mean they're not going to college? I'm like, it's going to be useless by then.
Well, you could see why I wanted to grab Kim on the show here, John. I met her for a few moments at an event, like I said, and I thought, man, this lady's smart, great, a lot of great energy. So when we're wrapping here on the show, would you mind sharing with us what is going on in your world today? And is there a way for people to follow you online or reach out to you?
Sure. So first of all, we just moved to Phoenix, where I saw you.
That's right.
We actually drove down to that meeting 2.5 hours from Flagstaff, Arizona.
Oh.
We just moved to Phoenix. So if you're in the Phoenix area, I'd love to hang out. I like to eat a lot so we could have lunch. And I like to climb big mountains so we could go for a hike, whatever floats your boat. And you can sign up for our newsletter at ironpeakproperties.com. That's ironpeakproperties.com. And follow me on Instagram at Money Plus Happy.
Money Plus Happy.
Yeah. Money, PLUS Happy.
I love that. Money Plus Happy. I'm going to follow you right now, actually.
Thanks.
See, and we're going to have so many reviews come in. Reviews help Kim. So many people love them. Hey, it's been great getting to know you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so
Kim.
much for having me, guys. Great chatting with you.
Absolutely.
Damn straight. We just got
buddy.
We got to the end of another great show. And everyone listening right now, you're the family and friends. Thanks for staying till the end.
That was so fun. And hey, hit the like, hit subscribe. We're here to serve you guys. That's why we're doing this show. Josh is not paying me. I'm doing this off of my quote unquote sweat equity because we want to make a difference in your life. And then that ripple effect will continue to touch the world.
Hey, amen, brother. Please check us out on capitalhacking.com, all the social media threads. And yes, I know you've probably already sent this episode to one of your best friends. Thank you. We love you. Just go right into your iPhone, hit the plus symbol. We'll talk to you later. See you next week.
Share.